Okay. All right, everybody. I think we should get a move on and people will come into the room. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jessica Scully. I'm the director of the Commonwealth Wine School. Kim Simone is also here, our manager. And of course, we are joined by the incomparable Adam Centamore, who is here to talk with us about, first of all of his many, many skills having to do with both cheese and wine. But I hope that you all saw that he has a book called Tasting Wine and Cheese, and you should get it because it's really entertaining and it's interesting and it's educational and it's beautiful. I have to say, the photos, Adam, are really nice.
Thank you.
And we sent you the link for that, and we will send it again and again and again. So even though this is in webinar format, there is definitely the opportunity to interact with Adam, to ask him questions. You could both raise your hands. Both Kim and I are going to monitor any hand raising, or you could put into the chat to everybody questions. We will pepper Adam with any of your questions and all of your questions throughout the next hour that we have together. And at the end, we'll also open it up to some Q&A. I could promote people so that people can see their screens if we want to. And that's I guess where we're going to go from there. So without any further ado, Adam, if you are ready, I'm going to unspotlight myself so that nobody has to see me on a big screen and let you take it away. Does that sound all right?
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, Jessica. Hi, Kim. Good to see you as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for choosing to spend some time on this Wednesday with me. As mentioned, I'm Adam, and I'm kind of a wine and cheese nerd. I am fortunate to be one of the instructors at Commonwealth Wine School, and I'm also very fortunate to be the author of a wine and cheese book, which is sort of the impetus behind being here. So again, thank you very much for joining. And like Jessica mentioned, please feel free to fire away with any questions that you have. The more exercise I get with you, the quieter my wife Carmen's evenings are, and she thanks you in advance for your sacrifice. So, the idea of this seminar is to talk a little bit about pairing wine and cheese in particular, but pairing in general. And I'm going to be using my book as sort of the lens through which I look at the topic. And for those that know me, for those that have spent more than 10 minutes talking to me, you're aware that pairings are sort of really what makes me super, super happy. I love wine, I love cheese, I love chocolate, I love charcuterie, I love all of it, right? All the eating, all the drinking, I love all of it. But what really, really, really makes me happy is when things come together and synthesize together and create these pairings that are just amazing. And it's sort of been that way for me my entire life, although it really kind of kicked into gear about 16 or 17 years ago at this point, which I don't want to say out loud, but around that, actually closer to 20 years now, when I started working at Formaggio Kitchen over in Cambridge. And for those that may not know, I was a manager there for a number of years. And it's sort of where I got all my certifications and started my studies and really kind of fell in love with the idea of food and wine. And, what got me going is this one particular day when this one particular cheese was there and they were saying, hey, you should take a taste of this because everybody would try stuff. And it was a fresh goat cheese from the Loire Valley called Valençay. And I absolutely fell in love with it, just head over heels in love with the cheese the second I tried it. And somebody sort of off to the side said, wow, I wonder what I eat with this. And that sort of planted the seed in my head. So I went on this mission for the next week to find all sorts of stuff that you could eat with it. And I found a citron confiture, like a preserve from the Pyrenees that was just cripplingly good with the Valençay. And so that the moment that I sort of tried those together, I was head over heels in love with pairing. I added wine and here we are. So I've always loved the idea of food and wine pairing. And I think for a lot of people, the idea of pairing stuff together can be a little bit, I don't want to say intimidating, that's kind of not the right word, but a little bit, it gives one pause because a lot of people think that there are right ways to do it and wrong ways to do it. And if I do this and it's a catastrophe that makes me an idiot or whatever, or I'm not sure where to start or anything like that. And as somebody that works in that industry, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues on the call will agree with me, it's really, really frustrating as somebody that works in that industry, because the whole point of this, all of this, is to have fun with it and enjoy it and just get the most out of it, right? Get the most enjoyment and the most pleasure out of it. So, part of the impetus for writing the book is to help people understand that, first of all, there's no really wrong answers. That's a lie. there are some really bad answers, like, and I'll talk about those, but the idea of pairing anything together, there's kind of no wrong answer. Like, feel free to try anything you want with anything you want. The worst that happens is it doesn't taste good and you move on, right? If bad, then else, otherwise just keep doing it. So, part of the idea of the book is to get people over that hump of thinking that it's impossible to wade into those waters, or to give people a little bit more confidence about it. And I had a lot of fun writing the book, mostly because at the time, my publisher took me aside and said, "Hey, would you like a budget to do research?" And I said, "No, that's okay. I've got 15 years of notebooks of notes that I've been taking." And the publisher looked at me and said, "I'm going to ask you that again. And just give it a just think about it for a second. Would you like some free money to go research?" And I went, "Oh, yeah, of course I would. Yes, please." So I was able to throw 2 parties, and they were for as many people as I could fit in my house. One was for red wines, and one was for red and fortified wines, and the other was for white wine and sparkling. And each event was 50 wines and 50 cheeses, and everybody came for free. It was totally paid for by by my publisher. And all I asked was, I had a grid, and I was like, I need data, any kind of data. I've got my notes, but I have to show something. So just whatever you want to put down, just give me opinions. And it was hilarious because by the time you get to sort of the bottom right-hand corner of each sheet, there were smiley faces and little jet planes and, all sorts of stuff. But it really kind of helped me understand how people looked at all of that sort of stuff. Now, I have been asked 100 times, 1,000 times, if another book comes up, can you be put on a waiting list for that research party? And the answer is absolutely. We can arrange for it. So don't sweat it. We'll do it again if we can. But what I want to do for today is take sort of the sum of all that knowledge and all the experience and all the research that went into me writing the book, and talk briefly about how this all works. And my hope is that the takeaway from today for you is basically, if you're not comfortable with pairing, that we mitigate that a little bit, that you at least see some rays of sun and have some confidence to go ahead and dive in. And if you're already completely into pairings, or you live like me, which is fearlessly putting chili pepper on your pancakes and you don't care how it goes, hopefully you'll come away with some ideas and just a better understanding about how it all works. So with that being said, if you are tasting along with me, the cheeses will come into this in just a little bit. I've got the 3 wines poured. If you do as well, feel free to sip as we go along in case you get thirsty. As both Kim and Jessica will tell you, I talk a lot about this stuff, so feel free to fire away, okay?
I have one thing to say very quickly, Adam, before you get going, which is that Amelia points out rightly that all of the attendees of this webinar should get first dibs on the next party.
That's fine. You know what? Maybe Commonwealth Wine School is the space in which we do it.
I like the
Just say it. I'm happily.
Where's your publisher?
The more the merrier. The more, the more data, the better the outcome. So absolutely, Amelia, happily. The first thing I want to talk about, I just want to talk about a couple of things leading up to us actually eating cheese and drinking wine. And just so you know, if you've got the cheeses and the wines and you want to start nibbling and stuff, go right ahead. Totally. Have some fun with this. I'll be going over everything specifically as we go through this, but please feel free to dive in and take a sip or whatever as we go. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is how taste works, because that is one of the core contributors to how this all works, right? How your brain works, how your perceptions about what you're eating and drinking works. And the first thing to know about tastes is there are technically 5 of them, as defined currently. Current science says there are 5 tastes. You've got sweet, you've got sour, bitter, you've got salty, and umami, which is kind of a savory note. Now, there are some fields of study that are suggesting that sensitivity to chili pepper, that sort of spicy, is a different taste. And there are other tastes that, like how many senses do you have? But in general, there's generally regarded there are those 5 tastes. Now, each of them act a little bit differently, and they react to different things. So they're fairly self-explanatory. I mean, sweet is caused by sugar contact, mostly fructose and glucose, although it can be triggered by amino acids and also by some alcohols. So there are some foods that are technically not full of sugar that may come off as kind of sweet, but generally sugar is what triggers the sweet reaction. Sour is caused by acidic solutions, of course, right? Sour candy. That's a great example of sour. And technically what's happening is acids hit hydrogen ions, they split and you come off as tasting sour. So think of sour candy. Now, bitter is an interesting one. And at this point, I will concede and I will confess that my undergrad was bioanthropology. So I am magna cum laude in bioanthropology. And to make that worse, to make that even less dateable in college, forensic osteology was my concentration. So yay, bone problems. But I digress. Bitter is interesting because it is thought that it evolved alongside us to keep humans from eating things that would kill you. Almost all the foods that you perceive as bitter are plant-derived. And there are like over 36 different protein sensors on your palate to sense all of these bitter components. Because historically, if you ate something that was bad for you, it would kill you, right? You didn't have the medicine to fix it. And so by eating this, if it had those compounds in it, it would trigger a bitter reaction, which was unpleasant in your mouth, and you would spit it out. It would keep you from eating it. Now, one of the big misunderstandings about how your palate works over the years is you may recall decades ago, there was this map of the tongue where sweet was on the front and salty was on the side. Like you could pick geographic areas on your tongue where these different tastes would trigger. That turns out to not be the case. There are receptors all over the palate, all over the palate. The only exception is bitter. In addition to being all over your palate, there's also a higher concentration at the back of your tongue, right at the entrance of your throat. And that's meant to be like a final safeguard. If what you're eating has bitterness and it's dangerous and it makes it past the front of your tongue, as it's getting ready to go down, there's a final chance to be like, don't do this, okay? So bitterness is like arugula. Bitterness is lemon, like pure lemon juice, like that kind of thing, okay? Salty is just sodium chloride, although there are some mineral salts that can trigger it as well, but salt is the best example of salty. And then you have umami, which is very savory. Now, the easy foods to think about for umami are mushrooms, soy sauce, meat broth. Like these are all very, very savory components. They're caused by either glutamic acid or aspartic acid. They're two different acids that trigger this. And glutamic is like what's in tomatoes and meat and mushrooms and all that stuff. Aspartic is asparagus, gives you that sort of umami sense as well. And this is glutamic acid, or actually the salt, which is called glutamate, is used in cooking a lot. Like Chinese food restaurants use glutamate a lot to kind of jack up the savory notes of their food. So those are the 5 tastes. Now, all 5 of them, again, can be all over the tongue, although there's a higher concentration of bitterness in the back. Now, the way this all works is when you eat something, the food releases chemicals on your tongue. And you've got taste buds. And in the taste buds, you've got nerve cells, and they're called papillae. And basically, those chemicals are picked up by these papillae. And inside each papillae, each of the papillae, are these little sensory receptors. And they're tuned, specialized to the 5 senses. So they pick up on these chemical compounds, and they trigger reactions. That info is passed up to the brain, and then it's mixed with a bunch of other data, and you come up with what you perceive as taste. Now, there's another component, there's another half to this, and it's not a 50-50 split. It's actually a 70-30 split. Whenever you say something tastes good, tastes great, whatever, you're like, wow, this tastes really good, about 70% of that's your nose talking. And you sort of know this, like when you have a cold, you can't taste anything. But it's not because like your tongue shut off. It's because your sensory up here is all blocked. Your nose does a ton of the work. And so when you have a stuffy nose, you can't taste anything, right? Well, the way that your sense of aroma works is when you breathe something in, molecules come off whatever it is you're eating or drinking or smelling. They hit your nose, and the first thing that happens is they're warmed up. And that's because the warmer the molecule, the easier it is to sense it. The more agitated it gets, the quicker things about it gets picked up. Now, your nose, as you breathe in, it channels it all the way back in your nasal cavity. And there's a little filter called the olfactory epithelium. I don't mean to get too nerdy about this. Sorry, this is the only chance I get to use my bioanthropology. So sorry, not sorry. But when you see a picture of a skull and there's like the hole missing right there, that's where it goes. It's a little sensory apparatus that is designed only for smelling. It's the only thing it does. So all these molecules come into your nasal cavity, they get warmed up, and they get popped into this olfactory epithelium where all these chemical receptors, the chemoreceptors, start interpreting them. The data goes up to the brain. Now, this is a really sort of important point conceptually that I'm about to make, but don't bring this up at a party. Like, don't ever bring this up at a party because nobody will talk to you. When you say, hey, this tastes really good, you're actually kind of misspeaking, because taste is only what your tongue is doing. That's the salty, bitter, sweet, that whole thing. When your brain gets the taste information, the olfactory information, all the aromas, and it starts adding things in like the texture, is it crunchy, is it smooth, is it hot, is it cold, like all that other, is it spicy, all that other data. When everything is put together and you have a final report, that's the flavor. So when you say, wow, this tastes really good, you're technically misspeaking. What you mean is you really like the flavor of that. It's correct to say this tastes salty, this tastes bitter, this tastes sour. Now, again, do not bring that up to anybody ever, because nobody wants to hear it. This is wine nerds and food nerds get sort of shunned at parties a lot when we start talking like this, because it's like, oh, here we go. Stick with that tastes really good. It's totally fine. But just so you know, there's a difference between them. Okay. Now that we know sort of a little bit about how your taste works, how your nose works, how sort of the machine functions, I want to talk briefly about how to think about pairings, because this is really where the tires hit the road. You don't need to know how your brain is processing data. I mean, it's neat, it's fun. If you're a nerd, it's kind of geeky and cool, but you really kind of don't need to know that. The beauty of what we all do, and what I do in my book and in my classes and what all of us do in these fields, is basically, it boils down to, if you like it, do it again. If you don't like it, don't do it again. Like, the beauty of what we do is it comes down to simply whether or not you enjoy what you're doing or not. Now, the challenge when it comes to pairing stuff, and in this case, wine and cheese, is that you're pairing things that aren't, while they seem naturally to go together, right? Go up to anybody, literally anywhere, and just say, hey, wine and they'll either say cheese or, as I joke, more wine, like one of the two, right? But when you start thinking about it, you're kind of pairing milk and booze, which, as I joke, college didn't turn out so well doing that. But when it works out well, it's fantastic. But it's not always going to work out great. You can't take any wine and any cheese and pair them together, because they each have their personalities, and you need to find ways to bring them together in a way that gives you a, sort of a harmonious output, a very pleasurable output. And so I think a lot of people kind of have a hard time with the pairing stuff, because what they'll do is basically, well, I know I like wine X and I know I like cheese Y. So if I like A and I like B, then A and B are going to like each other, right? And that does not work. And, I was saying earlier that there are no mistakes. And I said, well, no, actually there are mistakes. If somebody comes in your house and you want them to leave, it's like you need them to leave, get a Granny Smith apple, fresh goat cheese, and a really tannic red wine. And I promise you, in about 5 minutes, they will take the hint and it's time to go. So there are things that can go wrong simply because you are pairing things that actually exist. It's not all just emotional. And if you take tannins and you take high acids and goat cheese and apples and you put them together, it's a tough ride. It's like orange juice and toothpaste, right? It's that sort of outcome. And so there are ways to think about pairings that will give you more success than failure. And that's the name of the game. Learning how to look at this stuff through a certain lens and then applying it to the stuff that you like so you can make decisions for your palate. And once you see some basic concepts, some basic tenets of it, you can apply it across the board. You can kind of do it with anything, whether it's cheese and wine or a burger and a glass of scotch or whatever you want to bring together, right? This can help. So the first thing I want to sort of bring by you is the concept of complementary versus contrast, because to me, this is sort of the biggest decision you'll make when you walk down that path of bringing stuff together. And the difference between them is in complementary pairings, you're looking for things that create unity. You're looking for characteristics or elements of what you're pairing that will lockstep together and amplify that characteristic. With contrast, you're relying on the two things you're bringing together to act as counterbalances against each other. So the example I use in my book, the example I love to use is complementary. The best example I can give is macaroni and cheese, right? Everything about macaroni and cheese works together. Cooked macaroni, bechamel sauce, melted cheese, breadcrumbs, little bits of hot dog if it's been a bad day, like everything moves in one direction, right? Your wife catches you eating all the macaroni and cheese, and she's like, you're not going to live forever doing that. So you're like, I love you so much. I want this to go on. So I'll have a salad. And on the salad, you put olive oil and vinegar, a vinaigrette. That's a great example of contrast. It works because the smooth viscosity and fattiness of the oil is offset by the acidic high tones in the vinegar, lemon juice, whatever you're using to make it. So, there's a difference between the two. Now, for some people, they're like, how do I know where I fall in that spectrum? And it's not an either or. It's not a black or white situation. You can be 50-50, you can be 100% zero, you can be 80-20, whatever it is. The way that I like to help people sort of determine where they fall in this, is to think about a glass of lemonade and a glass of chocolate milk, or regular milk if chocolate milk's not your thing. Forget the time of day, forget the season. Like in a vacuum, out of 100 times, how many times are you reaching for the lemonade and how many times are you reaching for the chocolate milk? And the answer can be 50-50. There's no wrong answer here. I'm curious if anybody wants to put in the chat sort of where they fall in this. I'm curious where people fall. Like for me, 100 out of 100 times it's lemonade. It's very simple. If lemonade, then yes, else milk, right? Jen, excellent. Welcome to the light, 90% lemonade. Now my wife, and I like chocolate milk. I have no problem with chocolate milk, but I very strongly prefer lemonade. So for, my wife, of course, on the other hand, is like 99% chocolate milk. So she's reaching for the chocolate milk. All right, I'm seeing milk. Lemonade, no question. Excellent, Jessica. I knew you were quality. 100% milk, lemonade. Interesting. Hi, Denise. 95% lemonade. Okay. Now, the reason why I asked that problem, and again, there's no wrong answer here. There's no wrong answer here. But what I've found sort of anecdotally in my own, bioanthro nerdy way is the more lemonade in you, the more you like contrast in your pairings. The more milk or chocolate milk in you, the more you like complementary notes in your pairings. And again, it doesn't mean either or, but in general, that I prefer lemonade, and that, to me, that means I like contrast more, makes all the sense in the world. I drink more white wine than red. I put vinegar on my French fries. I like bright, tangy, acidic foods. Like I like a lot of pop and contrast. As I said, I'm using my wife because she's at work and can't do anything about it. She prefers 99% milk. So she prefers thicker sauces, gravies, dark red wines, smooth chocolates, like that sort of thing. And the reason why I bring it up in my classes, in my book and whatever, is because if you can figure that out about yourself, you have sort of uncovered a core truth in your pairing philosophy that will steer you in a lot of directions. So contrast versus complementary. Okay. Now at this point, I'm going to bring the cheese into it because it's already 1:25. And if you haven't eaten yet, you're mad at me. So we're going to bring cheese into this. And I had suggested 3 different cheeses to go with 3 different wines. So we have fresh Chev. And in this case, I'm using Vermont Creamery's herbed goat log. I suggested Manchego from Spain, and I suggested clothbound cheddar. For the wines to pair alongside with it, I suggested an unoaked Chardonnay, for example, Chablis. I went for a Petit Chablis because I was feeling randy today. For the Manchego, I suggested a Rioja Reserva, and for the cheddar, I suggested port. Now, the reason why I picked these are, there's a couple of them. First of all, they're very common pairings. They're very sort of straightforward. There's nothing weird going on. They're just straightforward, great pairings. Secondly, they're pretty easy to come by. And thirdly, most people have had these. They've had goat cheese in some form or another. You've probably come across Manchego, and we live in the land of Cabot. So I can almost guarantee anybody in the New England area has had Cabot. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and we're going to start with the unoaked Chardonnay and the goat cheese. If you're up for the pairing, if you're doing this along with me, the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is try the wine first. And the reason I suggest doing that is, generally speaking, when it comes to pairings, you want to try the lighter thing first, the less intense thing first. And most of the time in wine and cheese, that's going to be the wine. Christina, thank you. Yep, we are going to be recording it. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you, and I hope everything's okay. Take care. So give a taste of the wine first and just get to know it a little bit. You don't have to be a super wine nerd to get kind of nerdy about wine. There is so much to know about it. There is so much to learn about it. But in a basic, simple way, the first decision is, do you like it? Yes or no? And then beyond that, if you take it just a little bit of a step further, try to put your finger on some characteristics about it and just be super broad strokes about it. Is it fruity? Is it herbaceous? Is it, does it smell flowery? Is it sweet? Is it dry? Is it tangy? Is it smooth? Just super basic notes about it. So the Petit Chablis that I'm using is bright, it's acidic, it's got a lot of life to it, it's a little limey, it's got some herbs in it, that kind of thing. Very approachable, very sort of buoyant. And so pairing with that, what I'm looking for, how I choose what to serve with this, is I'm looking for things that will either completely accentuate those characteristics, if I want to complement them, or contrast them. Go in the complete opposite direction so they act as kind of a seesaw, like a balancing act. Now, in this regard, the fresh chèvre, the fresh goat cheese that I'm using, complements the acidic nature of the wine. The wine is bright and tangy and lively. The cheese is bright and tangy and lively. Now, it so happens that Vermont Creamery's fresh cheese logs, whether it's the herbed one or not, whichever one you're using, and even some of they have sort of wooden crate packaged ones like Coupal and Cremant and all those, they tend to have a little bit of a citrus note to them. Fresh goat cheese, on virtue of being very highly acidic, tends to come off as a little bit citrusy. So if you've tried the wine, go ahead and give the cheese a little bit of a taste. Don't mix the wine with the egg. Just try a bit of the cheese. And the name of the game here is to get to know each of the elements before you let the instruments play together. So you've gotten to know the wine a little bit. I'm trying a bit of this cheese, which I love. I'm not going to lie. I picked this cheese just so I'd have to eat it. It's very bright. It's very refreshing. There's a lactic, there's a tang to it that borders on sour. It's not sour. Sourness and bitterness are functions of acidity. In cheese, as the acidity gets turned up, it'll go from tangy to sour to bitter. So it's not bitter. It's very, very bright. It's very, very tangy. And so now once you've done that, this particular one that I have has some tarragon on it. So there's a sort of almost a sweet herbaceousness to it. Now what I'd suggest is take a little bite of the cheese, give it a second, and then while you're sort of working it, take a sip of the wine with it. Let them meet. Let them come together and see what happens. I'm going to eat that entire cheese log tonight. God, I love that so much. So again, bright, tangy, refreshing. It's all about buoyancy. This isn't about big, heavy, coating, rich. This isn't luxury sedan. This is sports car. Now, I'm curious if anybody minds putting in the chat that's doing it, what you guys think about it. How do you feel about that combination? Did it change once you mix things together? Where did the characteristics of one or the other morph into something different once you started letting them contact? Okay, it amplified the cheese, hopefully, Jen, in a good way. Excellent, great. It made the wine more fruity, 100%. 100%. Yeah, for me, it made the wine taste almost more lime curdy. Like there was a roundness to the wine that wasn't there before the cheese. And I love that. What's great, meringue is awesome. That's a great observation, Amelia. That's, this type of pairing I love because it's not heavy. It's not going to slow down your palate. It keeps things very, very light. Now,
Adam, what is the reason for the fruit accentuation? Is it the fat of the cheese, or is?
Yeah. So what's happening is in a weird sort of esoteric visual way. Imagine this as an equation, right? Think of algebra. So you've got an equal sign, and on one side is the cheese with all of its characteristics, and on the other side is the wine with all of its characteristics. As they meet, things will cancel each other out because they're found in both. So what happens is some of the acidity of the cheese is going to negate a little bit of your perception of the acidity in the wine. The fat in cheese, even though goat cheese doesn't have a lot of fat, it's going to coat your palate a little bit, which is further going to make the wine come down a little bit in acidity, not because it's neutralizing the acidity, but because it's being absorbed, getting through the fat layer to get to your tongue. When you eat this stuff, even though goat cheese isn't very fatty, whatever you're eating is laying down a sort of a coating on your tongue. And so when you drink something, it's got to get through that. And that's why, you know, when I talk about picking things that are of similar intensity or weight, or, you know, when I use the one that I always use is pairing beef stew with Pinot Grigio. The reason why Pinot Grigio doesn't taste like anything, you'll taste it for a nanosecond and then it just floats away. It's because the beef stew is so coating on your tongue, the Pinot Grigio can't get through it. Your mouth knows there's water in it, but all those delicate flavors can't permeate the coating. So they just get lost. They just get swept away. So yeah, the cheese's weight is commanding more of your attention. The little bit of fat that's in it, the fresh goat flavors in it, like it's the bigger, heavier thing. So the wine has to work harder to get through that. And in doing so, you shave off some of its characteristics. So what you're left with, what makes it through is still some body, there's still some acidity, but you get that fruit tone that the cheese isn't negating in any way. Yeah, I love this pairing. Now, I'm a big fan of condiments. You know, any class you've ever taken with me, it's condiment city all over the place. I like to make my own condiments. I smuggle things home from Europe, unless you're a federal agent, in which case it's all above the board. Like, I think condiments are a gorgeous bridge between the two. It's a way to tie things together. Now, there are purists out there that just really get mad with me when I say that, and that's totally fine. Again, rule number one, if you like it, do it, and that's all that matters. So to me, if I can add a condiment to this that will amplify, that will make the sum even greater than the total of the parts, I'm all for it. Now, the question is, which condiment? How do I bring these two together? So when I start thinking about what condiment to pick, I'm kind of going through that same process. Do I want to complement things? Do I want to contrast it? You know, how can I find ways for these things to come together? So right off the bat, to me, both of these have a lime-ish kind of note to it. They're citrusy, but not orangey, not lemony, not grapefruity. You know, lime is sort of the closest that my palate says to me. So if I want to bring these two together, if I want to accentuate those characteristics and link them, I'm going to pick something with lime in it. Now, what about the lime? Well, lime comes in all sorts of forms. You know, you can do like lime preserves, which are awesome, but you're going to add a really big, heavy, sugary note to it. That's a lot of weight on the palate, and maybe you're fine with that. If it were me, I wouldn't do lime jam with this, like lime preserves, unless this was bubbles. If this was cava, if this was champagne, if this was anything like that, anything with carbonation, then I think lime preserves would work great because the flavor's there, but now the weight of the preserves and the cheese are more of a team, and the bubbles come in and cut right through it, and it offsets it. So I wouldn't do preserves because this isn't carbonated. This doesn't have bubbles. You could do fresh lime. Okay, but fresh lime is really, really aggressive acidically. Like, it's not anywhere near as acidic as lemon, but it's really, really acidic. And the problem is, once you take a taste of that fresh lime juice, it is going to vaporize your palate for a moment while the high acidity is being dealt with, and you're going to lose nuance in these things. So what to do, right? Well, some examples could be lime curd, which is full-bodied and rich, but nowhere near as heavy as a preserve. You could do, like, for example, my personal favorite to do with this is to cut up lime slices and dehydrate them. Throw them on a sheet tray in the oven for like 2 hours at 175 degrees. You're drying them out. You know, you've had dried apple slices, you've had dried mango slices. It's the same thing with limes. But by toning them down, by cooking them and sort of dehydrating them, you've taken a lot of that acidic punch away. They're still bright and tangy, but they're much more mellow. And bonus, you get an extra layer of crunchy. So now I've added crunchy to go with the smooth. And for me, that kind of contrast makes it really, really fun. Now, if you're super nerdy, what you can do first, and I can get, if anybody needs recipes, Jessica, just so you know, just email us or whatever, and I can get you recipes for all this. But cut lime slices really, really thinly and make a simple syrup, cup sugar, cup water, put it in a saucepan and over medium heat until the sugar dissolves. So you have syrup. Put the lime slices in that for about 10 minutes and then dehydrate them for a couple hours in the oven. And what you wind up getting is a crunchy, tart, sweet condiment. that for me, the crunchy goes so good with that and is balanced by the fresh wine. So hopefully, are we good with this pairing? Is it good? Does anybody have any questions about what I was just talking about? All right, we press on. And there's time
I just
for
have one comment. I'm sorry.
Shoot. No, please.
I don't think I've ever done Chablis with goat cheese before. I'm a, Sauvignon Blanc and goat cheese, like that's the classic pairing.
Sure.
And I usually do like brie or something with a Chablis. So it's really interesting to, just to think about, hey, also a high acid white wine. Let's try it with a different kind of cheese and see what that pairing is like. So, kind of go back to your idea of it's all about experimentation and what do you like and trying to put those things together. So I think that really does highlight the idea that, hey, it's about what you like and let's just try a bunch of stuff.
Great. Now, did you try it? What'd you think of it?
It was good. It was good. It was different. It wasn't what I was expecting.
I think Chablis for me gets it doesn't get a bad rap. Like wine people know Chablis, but in general, the non-wine nerd, once they hear the word Chardonnay, they're like, because everybody's thinking of that big butter bomb, like that whole thing. And Chablis, you take that Kimmeridgian Ridge, you peel back layers of France, and you get Sancerre, which is Sauvignon Blanc, and Chablis, which is Chardonnay, and they share an awful lot of similar terroir. Like, Chablis acts a lot, to me, like a bigger Sauvignon Blanc. They're not identical, but if you like one, you should give the other one a try, because there's a pretty good chance it's going to be close to what you enjoy.
Yeah, so many similar characteristics between the two.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on to number 2. This is the Rioja Reserva with the Manchego. And, this is another one of those classic pairings. This is an example of, what grows together goes together kind of thing, right? In general, when it comes to pairing stuff, usually things that are really old that grew up in the same place have some sort of relationship, get along on some level, because they've had centuries or eons or millennia or whatever to kind of evolve to make each other happy. Like there's a reason why Chianti goes so great with Tuscan food, and there's a reason why Champagne goes great with shellfish, and like all these different, classic pairings. So this is one of those. Now, the idea behind this pairing is simply bolder red wine that matches with cheese, needs a cheese that's going to be a little bit bolder, like the wine. You need it to be able to stand up to it, right? You need the car to be able to tow the camper. So you need them to be able to handle that. And you want the cheese to have a little bit of salt to it. Now, it doesn't have to be this salt bomb, but you would never, like I would not do, I shouldn't say never, I would not do a Rioja Reserva, a bigger, bolder red wine with like fresh mozzarella, because there's no real salt backing in that. There's no real fat backing in that. So all the tannins, all the sort of the power of the wine is looking for something to grab onto. And if all it gets is a ball of mozzarella, it's just going to roll right over it. Now, Rioja Reserva, if you're not a Rioja nerd, there are different levels of sort of different classifications of Rioja, and Reserva is kind of, I think to me, where things start to get serious in Rioja land. Not that the younger stuff isn't legitimate wine. It's awesome wine. It's spectacular wine. It's wildly overlooked wine. But the Reserva requires a 3-year aging period, right? All Riojas require aging. And this is when I watch Kim and Jessica to make sure I get my details right, because they are ultra wine like nerds. So 3 years, of which a year has to be in barrel and 6 months has to be in bottle, correct? 1 and 6?
It's got to be. Reserva is aged for a year in American oak barrels, usually, but not always, especially these days, and 2 years in the bottle is what's required.
2 years in bottle. But the minimum 6 months, right? A
Reserva has to be a year in oak and 2 years.
Correct, but 6 months in the bottle is the minimum. Like you can go longer in the barrel if you want.
I think you have to go 2 years in the bottle as well.
Okay, all right.
Crianza is less.
Right.
And Joven is even.
2 and there's nothing on Joven, right?
Right.
So Reserva, you start getting into the more aged Riojas, you start to establish a little bit more body, a little bit more depth, a little bit more complexity, all that. You're maturing it, but it doesn't quite go to that, Grand Reserva level that tends to have more oak presence. And now you're getting into like the real big, sort of broader shoulder stuff. So, I love Reserva because it's nimble enough to pair with simpler foods and a broader range of foods, but it's complex enough that you can take on older cheeses, more mature cheeses, that sort of thing. Now, Manchego, of course, is the classic sheep milk cheese from Spain. It comes from the La Mancha plains, and it's from La Mancha sheep. Like, this is not terribly cleverly named stuff. But that has to be aged. Manchego has to be aged for a minimum of 60 days, up to 2 years. So like the wine, you can get Manchego in a range of age statements. And as it gets older, it gets a little more dehydrated, a little bit more moisture comes out, which makes it firmer, more easily grated. You will notice salt a little bit more prominently. And it's not because there are, there's more salt in it. It's because there's less moisture to dilute the sensation. It's once you've made the wheel and you're starting to age it, it has all the salt it will ever have in it. But as it ages, as the moisture comes out, there's less moisture on your tongue to dilute the sensation of salt. So you perceive it as more salty. So older ones will come off as a little bit saltier, much more intense in flavor, and also drier. And so one of the magic combinations in food and wine pairing is fat and salt and tannins. Right? It's sort of the basis on which red wine with meat is formed. The idea is red wines have tannins in them, right? It's sort of that grip that you get after you've swallowed red wine, and they come in varying degrees. Pinot Noirs typically have less tannic aggression than like Aglianico, for example, or, Barolo, like something with a lot more tannins. And those tannins, their best friends in this world are fat and salt. So when you eat something that has fat and salt, and the presumption with the meat is that it's fat marbled, and you're using fat and salt to cook it, whether it's oil or butter and salt and pepper. When they meet, it causes the tannins to kind of relax. Everything softens. You get this very sort of velvety textural sensation to it. And if you've never done this, when you have a moment tonight at dinner, try this. A super, super easy way, a 5-second way to illustrate that point is take a little table salt. And all you're going to do is take a sip of the red wine, eat a tiny bit of the salt, and then right away take another sip of the red wine. And you're mimicking that relationship. You're letting salt and tannins come together, and you'll notice how much the wine kind of just mellows out, just softens out a little bit, becomes a little bit more luxurious. It's very textural. So the idea of this pairing is that you have a cheese that's got some aging on it. It's got some austerity. It's got some seriousness, and you've got a wine that matches it in its intensity. So again, same thing. I'd suggest try the wine first.
Adam, while you're tasting, I have a Rioja update for you.
Please.
So the minimum of 3 years is true, of which one of those has to be an oak.
Okay.
And so then the question is, how long in bottle? And you are right, it has to be a minimum of 6 months, but that oak plus bottle has to be the minimum of 3 years.
So in total, so a year and 6 months are the minimums, and together you have to total a minimum of 3.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
That's really good. No, that's all right. That's better than saying I was completely wrong. Like that would. So, what I'm noticing is that the cheese has a lot of flavor. It's losing its fruitiness. When these cheeses are young, they tend to have a fruity profile that gets more savory as it ages. And so the one that I'm using is a 12-month. It's a what's called añejo. And it has a little bit more savory note to it, but you're starting to get some spice to it. There's a little bit of pepperiness to it, which is a typical note of sheep milk as it ages. You get sort of that animal starts to come through a little bit more. And the second I hit it with the wine becomes a little bit spicier to me, just a hint, but the texture everything just smooths out. All of a sudden, it's like cherry jam. It's awesome. So what to pair with this? Again, what condiment would I use to bring these two together? Depends on what I want to emphasize. If I want to emphasize the aging and the strength of these, then I would use something like dried cherries. You're going to add a tart, bright cherry note, which is going to make the wine very happy, but the salty weight of the cheese is going to calm down the brightness of the dried fruit. So you'll have this really sort of lustrous cherry note that brings together the two of them. If I wanted to emphasize sort of the brighter fruit tones, you could do something like a cherry jam would work great. Again, you're going to add that sugar component, but it's less critical here because these are bigger and heavier. They can handle the weight of it much better than the first pairing could. it'll be less impactful. It's not a wrong thing. It's more of an impact thing. So, something like dried cherries or cherry jam is great. If you are one of those people that have the ability to think ahead, which I rarely do, in the summer when cherries are at their best, pit them, mash them up. And then what I like to do is hit them with a little bit of vanilla extract or like a vanilla bean, if I have one, and then pour a little wine over it, little hit of sugar, and just stick it in the fridge for a couple of days and let the cherries macerate in the wine. And what winds up happening is they become a little bit boozy. The juice becomes a little bit sweet. And then you've got sort of almost like a cocktail that you can do. And if it's 1,000 degrees out, I am not built for heat or humidity. I'm just not. I'm much better in the cold than I am in the hot. So when it's really, really bad, I'll take a whole bottle of this, put a ton of cherries in it, add a little bit of that, a touch of sugar to it if it needs it, and just put it over ice and eat it with this cheese like when it's 1,000,000,000 degrees out. And it works really, really, really well. And if you're super bored, grilled vegetables, and then you shave this over it. So you've got really hot grilled vegetables, like with a lot of char on it, with manchego shaved over it, and then that over ice with cherries in it is awesome. See, we just tried lingonberry preserves on each cheese. Okay, yeah, I would imagine the manchego's got more weight. It's got bigger shoulders, Michael. So yeah, I think it would handle the lingonberry much better than the goat. Much better than the goat. It would have a chance with the goat if you were doing like a sparkling rosé, because then the wine would act as a buoyant, like as a buoyancy against it. But yeah, lingonberry is awesome. Not too many people do that. All right. Any questions about the second before I move on to number 3?
Your comment about putting vanilla in your cherries made me think, would there ever be a situation where you would want to highlight the oakiness of the wine? And that's what made me think vanilla, like this vanilla in this, this vanilla flavor, at least in my Rioja, that a little bit of it was highlighted with the cheese. But would you ever use that as the component that you would want to bring forward?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially if I'm doing, especially if I go for like a Grand Reserva. Speaking of Rioja in particular, right? There are plenty of red wines that emphasize oak, but Grand Riojas to me can have a lot of oak, like a very clear oak tone. Vanilla is just a magic wand when pairing with those, because it just brings out the oak. That vanillin just comes like screaming through. So, I've done it. I tried this once and it actually worked out really, really, really well. I haven't perfected the ratios yet, but it was a petite fillet, which on its own has a hard time with really tannic wines because there's no real fat marbling in it. You got to do something to the fillet to make it be able to handle a really tannic red, or a more prominently tannic red. It doesn't have to be like a monster, but so I ground up toasted hazelnuts, and I had made some vanilla sugar with vanilla beans. So I did a little bit of vanilla sugar and ground up hazelnuts and crusted the fillet with it, and with a Grand Reserva, and it was awesome. It was awesome. The danger is the sugar. It needs to be like just like a milligram of it, just enough to add that roundness. But the vanilla and the nuttiness pulled out the similar notes in the wine. It was awesome. It was all oak. It was great.
Using the nuttiness and highlighting that aspect of it is really cool. Yeah, very nice.
I would like to try that same treatment on fish. Like either like a swordfish or like a king salmon, like something with a lot of heft to it, because I think it could hold up. I think a crusted salmon could go with a Reserva, and you could emphasize what oak there is in this.
I'll try it and I'll report back to you.
All right, yeah. Well, you were the one that came up with Daniels and peanut butter and jelly, so.
Oh, that's true. That one's a winner.
Master, I've stolen that so many times. Unbelievable.
Thank you.
We call it the Simone principle. All right, so let's move on to number 3. I love Tawny Port, specifically Taylor Flagate 20-year Tawny Port. And like the goat cheese, I chose this pairing because it's classic. It serves my needs in terms of talking about stuff, but it gives me a chance to drink it. So Tawny Port is really kind of an interesting character because it has a ton of weight. It can have a lot of sweetness. But if it's a really well-made Tawny Port, there's tons of complexity, and it's not this sugar bomb that a lot of people perceive tawny port to be, or port in general to be. Yes, Jen, amen to tawny port indeed. Now, tawny ports are a little bit different than their cousins ruby port in that oxidation, exposure to air over its aging has turned it tawny brown, not cleverly named, but you've also added and sort of altered the flavor profile from being really big, rich red fruit to butterscotchy, toffee, caramelly, that sort of thing. And while ruby port is very, very sweet, relative to unfortified wines, relative to a regular red wine, for me, the sweetness comes through a little bit more in tawny port because it's that butterscotchy, toffee, caramelly, vanilla-y, like all those notes that I associate. And I happen to love that family of flavors. So this is right in my wheelhouse. Now with it, the classic is Stilton blue cheese. Almost any blue cheese is great. And the idea of that pairing is that the blue cheese has this big, strong sort of, V8 engine, and the tawny port comes in with an equal and opposite force. And together everybody just mellows out, which is great. But I don't think you have to use, it doesn't have to be blue cheese. I think cheddar and port works really, 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 really well. And one of the big reasons for that is how cheddar is made. Because the word cheddar, as I've mentioned in my classes, the word cheddar actually means three things, right? It's the food, you're eating cheddar cheese. It's the process by which cheddar cheese is made. So cheddar cheese is cheddared, verb. And then it's the name of the area in England in which they think the recipe originated, in Cheddar Gorge. So, back in the 12th century. So that cheddaring, what it means is when you make cheese, you heat milk, you add a starter culture, you add, you start adding like your rennet and stuff, and all the solids come out, all the proteins come out, you have curds, right? Well, part of that process is you use a starter bacteria that starts to eat the sugar in the milk, the lactose in the milk. And as you're making the cheese, that process goes on. Well, when you make cheddar and also Gouda or Gouda, after you've done the curd, once you've developed the curds and you've drained the vat, so now all you have is curds, you rinse them off. You don't do that with non-cheddared cheeses. You rinse them off. And the reason you rinse them off is to get rid of that bacteria, to wash that bacteria off. Well, once you do that, it stops eating the lactose. So there's only a little bit left, but there's some lactose left. And so what you wind up getting is a cheese that comes off as almost being a little sweet. It has that unique cheddar characteristic to it. And that's why cheddar and Gouda are so often sort of looked at similarly, because they're two of the only cheeses that practice that. So you get that slight sweetness to the cheese, but it's a milky sweetness, not a sugary sweetness, right? So you've got a cheese that's a little bit rounder, a little bit softer, but there's still saltiness to it. There's still some bite to it from aging, all that stuff. And it hits the sweetness of the port and it just explodes. Now, if you want, for this pairing, you could try the cheese first. Remember when I said at the beginning, when you're doing a pairing, try them separately to get to know them. And you want to try the bigger, heavier thing last, because otherwise it's going to impact how you perceive the lighter thing. In this case, the wine is the bigger, heavier thing. So in the case of my 20-year, if you have a 10-year, it's a little bit more even, but give a taste of the cheese first, right? And notice that sort of fruitiness and that softness and that slight saltiness. And cheddar's like all things to all people. It really is it's the reason why it's one of the most popular cheeses in the world. Once you've gotten to know that, now hit it with the port. And it's just pure harmony for me. It's just the wine becomes a little bit nuttier. The cheese becomes a little bit sharper. Some of the sweetness cancels out, so the cheese kind of steps up in its intensity. The wine is still big and rich and round. It's not going anywhere. There's not hardly anything in the world you could throw at this thing that would just make this go quiet. And so you've got this harmony that's very nutty and butterscotchy and toffee and caramel, and everything about it just makes me super, super happy. Now, again, what to pair with it? Well, it depends on which direction you want to take. If all of this together, thanks, Jen, of all of this of all the characteristics together, this may come off as being really, really sweet to you. And so you may want to use something that will counter that sweetness instead of adding to it. So if you want to counter that sweetness, salty is a great way to do it, right? Salty, sweet works great together. because they offset each other. So you could do salted walnuts with this. For example, you add a little crunchy, it's got, walnuts have that skin that's got a little bit of tannic dryness to it. So you can sort of use that as a pivot point. Typically for me, when I do these together, I am all in. Like if you're going to be a bear, be a grizzly. That's how I feel when it comes to this stuff. And so my favorite pairing with this is there's a company called Fat Toad Farm that you can find in Whole Foods and Formaggio and stuff. And they make goat milk caramel. And they make a salted bourbon caramel that is stupid on this. Just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. Don't even do it. It's ridiculous. But the good thing about it is you get all the caramel flavor, but because it's goat milk, it's like on a much lighter body. It's got some richness, but it doesn't have anywhere near the weight of a cow milk caramel. And so you get all that caramelly stuff, which just makes this scream. You get some sweetness, which ties into that, but the body is still a little bit lighter. Yeah, Fat Toad is really good stuff. Their vanilla is good, but for me, the salted caramel is the salted bourbon is just bonkers. There's no boot, like you're not drinking caramel, like it's not that kind of thing, but I use that. It's so Fat Toad is the name of the company. Michael, you can get it. If you're in the Boston area, Formaggio Kitchen sells it. I've seen it at Whole Foods, or you can just order it from them directly online. But I use them. There's always a jar in my fridge. I use that as the sweetener in my coffee. So instead of a sugar cube, it's like a little spoon of that, and I just pour the coffee over that. Okay, so Amelia tried the cheddar with the Rioja. All right, that's okay. Crianza's good too. No harm, no foul. It makes the wine a bit too tannic, yeah. So what's happening there is the cheddar is taking away enough of the body of the wine, sort of mathematically, if you will, that what you're left with perception-wise are the tannins in the wine. So it comes off as being more tannic. Now, what could also be happening is Crianza typically comes across as being a little bit more acidic. So you might have that a little bit brighter acidity with the tannins, and that's kind of making it talk a little bit louder, and the cheese just can't tackle that.
That happened with my Reserva too. I just went back and tried my cheddar with my Rioja Reserva, and yeah, the acidity is popping a little bit brighter.
Yeah,
than it was with the Manchego.
Cheddar is a significantly bigger cheese than most people think. Because it's like a big Saint Bernard.
I would not have expected that at all.
It's like a Saint Bernard. Like it's colossal, but so friendly and approachable that nobody ever thinks of it as anything other than like, oh, I love you, cheddar. But when you're pairing it with wine, it takes a big bite out of whatever you're drinking. It takes a huge bite. Yeah, happy to help, Amelia. Takes a huge bite out of what you're drinking. So you need something that can handle it. And that could be a Napa Cab, that could be an Amarone, it could be a Syrah, it could be Shiraz, it could be port. Just don't underestimate cheddar because it hits a lot heavier than you think it does. It's not the silent killer or anything, but for wine pairings, it makes things more challenging than you expect. All right, so now that we've sort of tried everything and I've talked an awful lot and I've used up my hour, are there any questions about anything that we talked about? Kathleen, hello, Kathleen T. How long will the 20-year-old Grahams, that's going to be delicious. The good thing about port is that it tends to live a little bit longer than red wine, than a standard bottle of wine will. The fortification of it gives it more staying power. I have a bottle of 20-year Tawny that has been sitting. I keep it in my foyer, which is outside temperature. I keep it cold, and it's been a couple of weeks, easy. Now, beyond that, I am happy to get advice from Jessica and Kim because I've never had a bottle live longer than that.
I have bottles that live a little bit longer mostly because I'm the only one who drinks in my house usually. But I think you're right. So a fortified wine will certainly last longer than a non-fortified wine because it's got extra alcohol. But even though port will often be 20% alcohol, it's not going to live forever. I think after a couple of weeks, if you were a port producer, you might not want to serve it to somebody as one of your best ports. I think if you have it at your house, it's going to be fine. I mean, I've had some live around for a month, 6 weeks. It's okay. It does change. Remember, a lot of the flavors with especially a tawny are oxidization flavors. So you're going to get, in some ways, more of those oxidization flavors, but you're going to lose some of the fruit. And then you can start to get a vinegariness that happens over time, which will be unpleasant. The only, of course, fortified wine or any wine that I know of that lasts forever is Madeira, which is something that you could open tomorrow, and it's been oxidized and it's been cooked, and you could taste it in 100 years and it will still be good. But just don't let your port, I guess, last that long. Enjoy it while you can, right?
Yeah, I'd say couple weeks, right? Couple weeks or less for it
sure.
to be at its best.
Yeah, for sure.
For a tawny, not for a ruby or a vintage. Drink those up.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And store them in your fridge, just like Adam keeps his in a colder environment. They will last longer if you keep them cold.
Things die slower when they're cold. I don't, maybe that could be phrased a little bit more eloquently.
I like to talk about it. I say, well, you always keep your leftovers in the refrigerator, so you want to do the same thing with your wine, and it will extend the shelf life of your leftovers. And the same thing goes with your open bottles of wine.
Exactly.
Regardless of what they are.
Refrigeration slows the inevitable. It does not stop it. All right. So any other questions about anything that we talked about? And I know that Jessica, said that we can open it up if people want to talk directly or type in the chat, or I just want to make sure that I didn't overlook anything because I talk a lot.
If anybody wants to talk, we can allow you to talk. If you've got questions, you can work into the questions.
Yeah, if you raise your hand, I think we can let you speak.
Thank you, Jamie. That was so my pleasure. We have one final thing to talk about before you leave.
So first of all, I'm going to do another pitch for Adam's fantastic book, which is on Amazon. Michael, we're going to send you the link. Actually, Kim, do you have the link pulled up? Can we paste it into the chat right now? We'll paste it into the chat. You can get it on Amazon. I have a feeling, Adam, are they printing it and then sending it? So you'll get it sort of within about a week-ish?
No, my last I checked, Amazon has a stock of it.
So zip. Mine took a few days, but it got here. And can I just, I really do think it's beautiful. So Adam has it set up by wine categories, and then he talks about the wines and what to pair it with, and excellent things that go with it, and the cheese that loves it. I loved everything. So the other thing that you need to know is that besides the fact that Adam always has lots of classes going on with us, he is going to take a group of us to Italy with him in September for people who are interested, to really nerd out on cheese and on wine in the Piedmont. So we're talking going to Barolo, we're talking Barbaresco, we're talking Alba and Asti. And I'm going to share my screen right now so that you could see the trip. This is actually being run in conjunction with a tour guide. Can everybody see this? Rose Travel has put this together in conjunction with us and in conjunction with Adam. It's going to be an amazing trip that's going to last a week. It comes in shy of $5,000 a person, which I think is pretty good for a whole week. We're going to eat, we're going to drink. It's going to be a small group, max 16 people, and it's going to be fantastic. So you could find it on our website underneath tours, but then you'll book it through Rose Travel.
We're going to a cheese festival. We're going to the cheese festival. Just to nerd out on cheese for a second. Every other year, the village of Bra turns into ground zero for a colossal cheese festival. And for reasons unbeknownst to me, it's just called cheese. Like, not even in Italian, it's English. It's just called cheese. So, one of the days we're going to spend the day at the cheese festival. It's going to be so good. I'm dying, Hannah. I'm dying to go. I can't wait. I suppose if I have to drink Piemontese wines the rest of the time, all right, fine. Hi, Hannah. How you doing?
So it looks like Jen Curry wants to talk, so I'm going to allow her to talk right now.
Yeah, of course.
All right, go ahead, Jen. Hold on. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. First, hi, Adam. Fully transparent. I haven't bought your book yet, but Adam's been to my house for a private tasting and it was fantastic. And I've been texting with my family during this saying we need to do it again this summer. But one thing I wanted to touch on was what you went over earlier in the presentation. I was having technology issues and I am unfortunately a COVID long hauler who has had a significant impact in my palate, my taste, how my brain recognizes things. And I thought it was really interesting how you mentioned bringing in texture to food, because that's one thing that for me, I was 100% totally absent of taste and smell for about 4 months. And I am still having difficulties with it. And what was shocking to me was that I all of a sudden loved crunchy foods, cereals, like things that I truly felt like I was actually eating, and I got great satisfaction from crunching, which I just had never thought of before. And when I think of pairing things, I rarely think about texture. And I think it's an important thing for us to consider. And when you talked about the dehydrated limes, I never thought of, adding dehydrated limes, but in my own experience, having that sort of lack in taste and smell and my ability to really piece it together. It's really why I took the class today, was to kind of test myself on my palate and my pairing, and why I haven't booked Italy yet, but I'm thinking about it. So I just wanted to point out how really, having that removal of some of my senses and focusing in on texture is so important to how we interpret taste. It's not just how it tastes, it's the experience that's going on in your mouth.
I couldn't agree more. First of all, hi, Jen. Thank you for joining. And thank you for the kind words. That's flattery will get you everywhere, madam. Sorry to hear about the COVID long haul. I hope nothing but a speedy recovery.
Yeah, it's just taste and smell right now. So I'm good. It's
Good.
just an impact when you like to cook and drink wine.
Oh, absolutely. And I will say that I'm a very textural person in what I eat. I love texture. I love crunchy things. And I don't know why. I don't know how I came across this. I don't know why I came across it. But a couple of years ago, I found out that one of my favorite things to eat from a textural perspective, and don't judge me, is orange slices dipped in grape nuts. I don't know why. I have no idea why. I just love it so much. It's like the bright citrusy and then all the crunch. Like grape nuts are the textural food for me. Like they make everything crunchy and better. And for whatever reason, one day I just dipped an orange wedge into my grape nuts and I was like, this is amazing. So
yeah, don't underestimate the texture.
no, not at all. Not at all. That's a huge part. And that's why I love like dehydrated lime peels and stuff, because it adds that dimension.
Any other questions from folks? If any more hands raised.
I think it's a little hard to remember. Oh, thanks, Amelia. Happy to help. And if you have any questions, send me an email. You can get me through the school, and I'm happy to summarize, and I can fill in any gaps. Happy to help. Thank you for joining. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, everyone, thank you so much for joining. You are going to get a link to the recording. Thank you, Denise, for saying that. We're going to send you a link to our online platform, which will have the entire thing that you could just sign up to. We're going to put it on our YouTube channel also, so you'll have that. We will send you links to both. Feel free to share it around, send it along, comment, anything you want. And yeah, definitely reach out to us at the school with questions or comments or concerns or praise. We'll pass everything along to Adam. And we'll do another one of these very soon, and we'll see you soon. And the other thing we'll put in the link to the webinar is, of course, Adam's book as well. So
thanks, everybody. Thanks, Denise.
Adam, thank you so much.
Hope everything's well. My pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Adam.
Take care.
Have a good afternoon, everyone. Stay dry wherever you are. Here it's a little wet. Take care.